There is a sound that never leaves me. It is the sound of a heart monitor slowing down, one beep at a time, while the people who were supposed to love me most were 3 floors below, laughing over wedding invitations. My name is Naomi. I was 19 years old when I learned that love, in my family, came with conditions. And I learned it while lying in a hospital bed, waiting for news that could decide whether I lived or died. Let me take you back to where it all began, because to understand how deep this betrayal cut, you need to understand the world I grew up in. I was the second daughter. My sister, Celine, was the first. In our house, that one detail decided everything. She was born first, so she was the golden child. I was born second, so I was the quiet one, the reasonable one, the one who was expected to understand, to wait, to give way. Nobody ever said those words out loud. They didn't have to. I felt it in the way birthday candles were bigger for her. I felt it in the way my report cards were glanced at, while hers were framed. I felt it in every small moment where I learned, slowly, that my needs came second. I want to be fair, because this story is not about painting my family as monsters from the very first page. My parents were not cruel people, not in an obvious way. My father worked long hours at a hardware supply company, coming home smelling of metal and dust, too tired most nights to ask how my day went. My mother ran our home like a quiet, careful machine, cooking meals, tracking bills, folding laundry with a kind of devotion that looked like love. In many ways, it was love. But it was a love that had a hierarchy, and I was never on top of it. Celine was 3 years older than me, and from the time I was small, I adored her. She had this easy warmth about her, the kind that made people gravitate toward her without even trying. She would sit with me on the porch steps in summer, braiding my hair, telling me about boys she liked, about dreams she had. For a long time, I thought we were close. For a long time, I didn't see the difference between being loved and being used as an audience. By the time I turned 17, my health had already started giving me quiet warnings. I would get tired faster than my friends. My skin would take on a strange, dull paleness some mornings. I brushed it off as stress, as exams, as growing pains. My mother, when I mentioned it, would say, "You're just like your father, always overthinking your body." So I stopped mentioning it. It was during my first year of college that everything cracked open. I collapsed in the middle of a lecture hall, and when I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with tubes taped to my arm and a doctor speaking words I didn't understand at first. Kidney failure. Not sudden, not an accident, but something that had been building quietly for years, something that could have been caught early if anyone, including me, had been paying closer attention. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, feeling strangely calm, the way you feel calm right before something terrible fully lands on you. The doctor said the word transplant like it was a simple next step, like scheduling a haircut. I did not yet understand that this single word would reveal exactly where I stood in my family's heart. My mother cried when she got the news. I remember her holding my hand so tightly it almost hurt, telling me everything would be fine, that we would fight this together. For a few days, I believed her. For a few days, I felt like maybe, finally, I was the center of my family's world. Then Celine got engaged. I still remember the exact moment the phone rang in my hospital room, my mother's face lighting up in a way I had rarely seen it light up for me. She pressed the phone to her ear, gasped, then squealed with a joy so loud the nurse had to gently remind her to lower her voice. Celine was getting married. 6 months from that day. To a man from a wealthy, respected family, the kind of family my mother had always dreamed of being connected to. I was happy for my sister. I want to be honest about that. In that moment, lying weak in a hospital bed, I still loved her enough to smile, to whisper congratulations, to feel a flicker of joy underneath my exhaustion. What I did not know what I could not have imagined, was that this happy news would become the quiet, poisonous root of the darkest betrayal of my life. Because somewhere in the weeks that followed, in conversations I was never invited into, my family made a decision. A decision about me, about my body, about my chance at survival, without ever asking what I wanted or what I needed. They decided that my transplant could wait. Not because the doctors said so. Not because there was some medical reason to delay. But because a transplant surgery, with its long recovery, its risk of complications, its unpredictable timeline, might interfere with Celine's wedding. It might mean I was in a hospital bed instead of a bridesmaid dress. It might mean family photographs with an empty space where I should have been standing. It might mean whispered questions from wedding guests about why the bride's sister looked so sick, so pale, so wrong for the pictures. I did not know any of this yet. All I knew, in those early weeks, was a strange, creeping change in the way my family spoke to me. My mother, who had once held my hand so tightly, began speaking more about wedding colors than blood tests. My father started missing hospital visits, citing work, though I later learned some of those missed visits were spent at menu tastings and venue walkthroughs. Celine, my sweet sister who used to braid my hair on the porch, stopped asking how I was feeling and started asking if I could hold on a little longer before making any big medical decisions, because she didn't want, in her words, unnecessary stress during her engagement season. I remember lying awake one night, staring at the 4 in my arm, and feeling something shift inside me. A small, quiet doubt. A question I was not ready to ask out loud yet, but one that would not leave me alone. What if my family was choosing a wedding over my life? I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself grief and fear were making me imagine things that weren't there. I wanted, so badly, to believe that my family would never do something so cruel, so calculated. I held on to that belief the way you hold onto a rope over a canyon, not yet realizing the rope was already fraying. But 3 weeks later, in a conversation I was never supposed to overhear, I would learn the truth. A truth that would break something in me forever, and set into motion a chain of events that would change all of our lives. Because what I didn't know that day, sitting quietly in my hospital bed believing in the love of my family, was that the real betrayal was only just beginning. The conversation I overheard happened on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after Celine's engagement announcement. I had been moved to a different section of the hospital for a series of pre-transplant evaluations, and my room happened to share a thin wall with the small family consultation area, a space where doctors met relatives to discuss treatment plans in private. That evening, my parents and my sister had gone there to speak with my nephrologist, and I had been left alone in bed, drifting in and out of sleep from medication. I woke to voices, low but clear enough to make out through the wall. At first, I thought I was imagining it, some strange dream stitched together from worry and exhaustion. Then I heard my mother's voice, sharp and pleading. "Doctor, is there any way this transplant could happen after the wedding? Just a few months. Please, we need this time." There was a pause. Then the doctor's voice, careful and measured, explaining that delaying a transplant carried real risk, that my kidney function was declining, that waiting could mean the difference between a manageable surgery now and a life-threatening emergency later. My father spoke next, his voice tired but firm. "We understand the risk, doctor. But surely a few months won't make that much difference. We just need to get through Celine's wedding first. It's such an important time for our family." I remember the way my body went cold, the way my breath caught somewhere in my chest and refused to move. I told myself I had misheard. I told myself there was some other explanation, some context I was missing. Then Celine's voice cut through, and it shattered whatever last hope I had. "I'm not asking her to die," she said, her tone almost defensive, almost annoyed. "I just don't want my wedding photos to have a sick sister in a wheelchair, or worse, an empty seat because she's in surgery. Is that so selfish? This is supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The happiest day of her life. Those words echoed in my mind long after the conversation ended. My life, apparently, was a variable to be managed around her happiness. My survival was an inconvenient subplot in her love story. I lay there in the dark, tears sliding silently down my face, not from sadness at first, but from a strange, hollow shock. The kind of shock that empties you out before the pain even arrives. I thought about all the years I had quietly accepted being second. I had told myself it was fine, that love didn't have to look the same for everyone, that being the quiet daughter didn't mean being the unloved one. But hearing my own parents negotiate my survival around a wedding date broke something in me that no amount of self-comforting could repair. When they came back into my room that night, smiling, asking how I was feeling, I said I was fine. I did not tell them what I had heard. Something in me, some instinct for self-protection, told me to wait, to watch, to understand the full shape of what was happening before I reacted. Over the following weeks, I watched my family with new eyes, and what I saw confirmed everything I feared. My transplant evaluation, which should have moved forward immediately given my declining numbers, kept getting quietly delayed. My mother would tell the coordinating nurse we needed a little more time to arrange finances, even though, as I later discovered, insurance had already approved the procedure. My father, who I once thought simply had a demanding job, started scheduling important family meetings about seating charts and catering menus, on the same days as my scheduled hospital consultations, forcing me to reschedule, again and again. Celine visited less and less, and when she did visit, our conversations felt like performances. She would ask how I was feeling in the same tone she used to ask about weather, polite, detached, waiting for her turn to talk about flower arrangements or dress fittings. Once, when I gently mentioned that my declining kidney function scared me, she sighed and said, "Naomi, please, can we not talk about hospital stuff right now? I'm dealing with so much wedding stress." I remember staring at her, waiting for some flicker of the sister who used to braid my hair, some acknowledgement that my life mattered as much as her seating chart. It never came. The turning point, the moment my quiet grief hardened into something else, happened on a rainy afternoon when I was rushed to the emergency room after a sudden, frightening drop in my kidney function. I remember the sharp pain in my back, the nausea, the fear clawing up my throat as machines beeped urgently around me. I remember a doctor's face, serious and tight, telling my parents that we could not afford to wait much longer, that every delay increased the risk of complications that could become fatal. My mother cried in the hallway that night. I heard her through the door, her voice thick with something that almost sounded like guilt. But when I asked her later, once I was stable again, if we could finally move forward with scheduling my surgery immediately, she hesitated. She looked at my father. And then she said words I will never forget. "The wedding is in 6 weeks, Naomi. Your father already put down a deposit on the venue we can't get back. Celine has been planning this for months. Can you please just try to hold on until after? The doctor said it's risky, but not impossible. We just need you to be strong a little longer." I looked at my mother's face, searching for some sign that she understood what she was asking of me. Some acknowledgement that she was gambling with my life for the sake of a party. I found none. Only exhaustion, and a kind of quiet, practiced denial, the look of someone who had convinced themselves that choosing convenience over urgency wasn't truly choosing at all. That night, lying in my hospital bed, something shifted permanently inside me. The naive, hopeful part of me, the part that had spent 19 years quietly hoping to be loved as much as my sister, finally closed its eyes and let go. In its place came something colder, clearer, and far more determined. I decided, in that moment, that I would survive. Not because my family made room for me to survive, but in spite of the fact that they hadn't. I began quietly reaching out on my own, calling the transplant coordinator directly, asking questions my parents had been avoiding on my behalf. I learned that my case actually qualified for an accelerated evaluation given the severity of my decline, something my parents had never mentioned to me, likely because moving quickly meant surgery would fall right in the middle of wedding preparations. I also began writing everything down. Every delayed appointment. Every rescheduled consultation. Every conversation where my health was treated as a scheduling inconvenience. I did not yet know exactly what I would do with this information, but some instinct told me that one day, the truth would matter, and I wanted to be ready to tell it clearly, without exaggeration, without needing to raise my voice, because the facts alone were damning enough. I also started confiding, carefully, in my Aunt Ruth, my mother's older sister, a woman who had always stood slightly outside the family's inner circle, respected but rarely consulted. Ruth had a steadiness about her, a clear-eyed honesty that the rest of my family lacked. When I told her what I had overheard, what I had witnessed over the following weeks, her face went pale, then hard with anger. With Ruth's help, and with the transplant coordinator's support, I pushed forward with scheduling my surgery independently, timing it deliberately for a date that fell exactly 1 week before Celine's wedding. Not out of spite alone, but out of necessity, because my doctors made clear that waiting any longer risked permanent, irreversible damage. When I told my parents the surgery date, expecting perhaps guilt, perhaps relief that I had finally taken control, I instead saw something that confirmed, once and for all, the true shape of their priorities. My mother's face tightened with something close to panic. 1 week before the wedding. Naomi, if anything goes wrong, if you need extended recovery, you understand this could completely disrupt everything. Guests are already confirmed. The photographer, the venue, everything is locked in. I remember looking at her, feeling strangely calm, the storm inside me having settled into something quiet and resolved. She did not catch the quiet edge beneath my words. Or perhaps she did, and chose not to acknowledge it, the way she had chosen not to acknowledge so much else. What none of them knew yet, what I had not yet revealed, was that Aunt Ruth and I had been quietly documenting everything, and that a plan, born not from cruelty but from a desperate need for the truth to finally be seen, was already taking shape. Because what my family did not understand, in their rush to protect a single perfect day, was that some truths do not stay buried. Some truths surface exactly when you least expect them, often in front of exactly the people you were trying hardest to impress. The morning of my surgery arrived exactly 1 week before Celine's wedding, just as I had planned. My parents came to the hospital that day, distracted, checking their phones between visits to caterers and florists even as I was wheeled toward the operating room. I remember looking at my mother's face as the anesthesia began pulling me under, searching one last time for something that looked like fear for me, rather than fear for the wedding schedule. I found only a tired, distant worry, the kind you might feel about weather forecasts threatening an outdoor event. The surgery itself, I am told, went as well as anyone could hope. Aunt Ruth stayed by my side through recovery, holding my hand the way my mother once had, back when I still believed her love came without conditions. When I woke up, groggy and sore but alive, the first thing I felt was not relief, but clarity. A clean, cold clarity about exactly what I needed to do next. Because while I had been in surgery, Aunt Ruth had quietly reached out to Celine's fiancé's family, a family known, ironically, for valuing honesty and loyalty above wealth or appearances. She did not do this out of malice. She did it because she believed, as I did, that people building a life together deserved to understand the true character of the family they were joining. She shared, carefully and without exaggeration, the timeline we had documented. The delayed evaluations. The rescheduled consultations. The overheard conversation about wedding photos and empty seats. She did not ask them to cancel anything. She simply asked them to know the truth before they stood in front of that family and made lifelong promises surrounded by people who valued appearances over a daughter's survival. The wedding proceeded as planned, 1 week after my surgery, but not in the way anyone in my family had imagined. I attended, against doctor's advice, wheeled quietly to a back row in a simple black dress, weak but stable, determined to witness the moment the truth finally met the light. I watched Celine walk down the aisle, radiant, unaware that in the front rows, whispered conversations were already spreading among the groom's family, quiet questions passed discreetly between relatives who had learned, just days before, exactly what kind of family they were welcoming into their own. The reception was where everything unraveled. During the toasts, the groom's mother, a composed, graceful woman named Adiz, rose to speak. She spoke warmly at first, of love, of family, of new beginnings. Then, gently but unmistakably, she turned the conversation toward something deeper. Family, she said, her voice steady and clear across the room, is not measured by how beautiful a wedding looks in photographs. It is measured by how we treat each other when things are hard, when things are inconvenient, when someone we love is suffering and needs us most. She paused, letting silence settle over the room. We recently learned, she continued, that a member of this family fought for her life this past month, while decisions were being made about her care based on this wedding's timeline. We share this not to embarrass anyone, but because we believe our children are beginning a marriage, and marriages are built on the values we choose to carry forward. We hope, moving forward, this family chooses differently. I will never forget my mother's face in that moment, the color draining from it in front of 200 guests. I will never forget my father's stiff, frozen posture, or Celine's trembling hands as she realized, in real time, that her carefully curated perfect day now carried a truth she could not control or edit away. I did not feel triumphant watching this unfold. I want to be honest about that. I felt, instead, a quiet, aching sadness, the grief of watching your family's true character revealed in front of the whole world, even when that revelation was necessary. In the weeks that followed, my family fractured in ways that could not be repaired with apologies alone. My mother called me repeatedly, alternating between tearful apologies and defensive justifications, insisting she had only been trying to hold everything together, that she never meant to endanger me, only to manage an impossible situation. Celine, for her part, took much longer to reach out, and when she finally did, her apology carried a weight I had not expected. She admitted, quietly, that she had let ambition and image blind her to what truly mattered. She admitted that somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that my life could simply wait for her happiness, and that realizing the cost of that belief, in front of her new family, in front of her own conscience, had broken something in her that needed rebuilding. I did not forgive quickly. I do not think quick forgiveness would have honored what I had survived. But over time, through therapy, through honest conversations, through slow, careful rebuilding, some relationships found a new, more honest foundation. Others did not survive at all, and I have made peace with that too. What I carry forward from this chapter of my life is not anger, though anger visited me many times. What I carry forward is a clearer understanding of my own worth, an understanding that no relationship, no matter how deeply rooted in blood or history, deserves my silence when my life is treated as negotiable. If there is a lesson in this story, it is this: love that only shows up when convenient is not love at all, it is preference, dressed up to look like devotion. True family does not ask you to shrink your needs to protect their image. True family shows up in hospital rooms, not just wedding halls. I am alive today because I finally chose to fight for myself, even when the people who should have fought hardest for me chose a wedding instead. And if you are somewhere out there, quietly wondering whether your own pain matters as much as someone else's celebration, I hope this story reminds you of something important. Your life is not a scheduling inconvenience. Your survival is not a subplot in someone else's happiness. You deserve people who show up for you exactly when it is hardest, not just when it is easy. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it reminded you of your own worth, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.